At my daughter's wedding, my son-in-law ordered me to hand over the keys to my farm in front of 200 guests. When I said no, he slapped me so hard I lost my balance. I walked out and made a call. He went hysterical when he saw who it was. I never imagined my daughter's wedding day would end with me bleeding on the marble floor of the reception hall, but that's exactly what happened when Alan showed his true colors in front of 200 guests. The day started like any father's dream. Avery looked radiant in her grandmother's vintage lace dress, the same one my late wife Margaret wore 32 years ago. I walked her down the aisle of the old chapel, fighting back tears as she squeezed my arm and whispered that she wished Mom could see her. For a moment, everything felt perfect. For a moment, I forgot about the growing unease I'd been carrying about Alan for months. The ceremony itself was beautiful. Avery glowed with happiness, and I forced myself to smile whenever Alan's eyes met mine. He had that practiced charm, the kind that fooled everyone except those who looked closely enough. I'd learned to look closely over the past 2 years, ever since he started asking pointed questions about the ranch property, about my will, about what would happen to the land when I was gone. But weddings have a way of bringing out people's true nature, and Alan's mask began slipping during the cocktail hour. I was standing near the bar, nursing a whiskey, and watching Avery laugh with her college friends when Alan appeared beside me. His bow tie was loosened, his face flushed from champagne, and there was something different in his eyes. Something harder. "Clifford," he said, clapping his hand on my shoulder with more force than necessary. "We need to talk." I turned to face him, noticing how several nearby guests had quieted their conversations. "What about son?" The word son seemed to irritate him. His jaw clenched slightly before he forced another smile. "About the ranch. About Avery's future. Our future. This isn't the time or place, Alan." I kept my voice low, hoping to diffuse whatever was brewing. "It's your wedding day. Enjoy it." But Alan had other plans. He stepped closer, his voice dropping to a whisper that somehow felt more threatening than if he'd shouted, "Actually, it's the perfect time. All these witnesses around, all these important people from both our families." A chill ran down my spine. The way he said witnesses made my stomach turn. I glanced around and realized we were surrounded by his business associates, his family members, people I barely knew. Avery was across the room, still laughing with her friends, oblivious to what was unfolding. "Alan, whatever you're thinking." "I'm thinking," he interrupted, his voice rising just enough for others to hear, "that it's time for some generosity, some real family support." That's when I saw it. He reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out a small velvet box. For a moment, I thought it might be another wedding gift. But when he opened it, my blood ran cold. Inside was a set of keys. My keys. The keys to the ranch house, the barn, the equipment shed. Keys I'd definitely not given him. "How did you get those?" I asked, my voice barely steady. Alan's smile turned predatory. "Avery made copies. She thought it would be a nice surprise. A symbolic gesture." He held the box higher, making sure the people around us could see. "But I think we need the originals, don't you? Along with the deed transfer papers." The whiskey in my glass trembled as my hand shook with anger. "The what?" "Come on, Clifford. Don't play dumb." His voice was loud enough now that conversations around us had stopped entirely. "Avery is your only child. The ranch should be hers, should be ours. And frankly, a man your age shouldn't be carrying that kind of burden alone." I felt the weight of 200 pairs of eyes on us. The music had stopped. Even the waitstaff had paused in their duties. Alan had orchestrated this perfectly, creating a public moment where any refusal on my part would look selfish, unreasonable. "The ranch isn't going anywhere," I said carefully. "And this isn't a conversation for when? When you're dead." Alan's mask slipped completely now. "Avery deserves security now. We both do. And that ranch is sitting there, wasted on an old man who can barely manage it anymore." The insult hit like a physical blow. Several guests gasped audibly. I saw Avery's Aunt Martha cover her mouth in shock. In the distance, I could see Avery had finally noticed the commotion and was making her way over, her dress trailing behind her, confusion written across her face. I said, "No, Alan." My voice was steadier than I felt. And I meant it. That's when everything changed. Alan's face twisted with rage, all pretense of civility gone. He stepped closer, his breath hot with champagne and fury. "You stubborn old fool. Do you have any idea who you're messing with?" Before I could respond, before I could step back, before anyone could intervene, Alan's hand cracked across my face with a sound that echoed through the silent reception hall like a gunshot. The slap was hard enough to knock me off balance. My left foot slipped on the polished marble and I went down hard, my hip hitting the floor first, then my shoulder. Pain exploded through my body as I lay there, stunned, the taste of blood filling my mouth where I'd bitten my tongue. For a moment, there was absolute silence. Then the whispers started rising like a wave. "Did he just hit him? Oh my God, did you see that? Someone call security. I pushed myself up on my elbow, looking around at the circle of horrified faces surrounding me. Alan stood over me, his chest heaving, his fists still clenched. He looked as shocked as everyone else, as if he couldn't believe what he'd just done. That's when I saw Avery. She was standing at the edge of the crowd, her hands pressed to her mouth, tears streaming down her cheeks. But she wasn't moving toward me. She wasn't rushing to help her father, who'd just been assaulted at her wedding. She was staring at Alan with something that looked like fear. I realized in that moment that this wasn't the first time she'd seen this side of him. Slowly, painfully, I got to my feet. My hip screamed in protest, and I could feel a bruise forming on my cheekbone, but I stood tall. I looked Alan straight in the eye, then let my gaze sweep across the crowd of guests, many of whom I'd known for decades. I think, I said quietly, my voice carrying in the stunned silence. This reception is over. I turned and walked toward the exit, my leg aching with every step. Behind me, I could hear Alan's voice. Higher now, desperate. Clifford, wait. I didn't mean that was. We can work this out. I didn't turn around. I didn't acknowledge him. I simply walked out of the reception hall, out of the hotel, and into the parking lot where my truck was waiting. Once I was safely inside the cab, I pulled out my phone. My hands were still shaking, but I managed to find the contact I needed. The phone rang once, twice. Then a familiar voice answered. Clifford, how did the wedding go? I closed my eyes, feeling the weight of what I was about to unleash. Robert, I need you to come to Houston tonight. It's time. There was a pause. Are you sure? Once we do this, there's no going back. I looked back at the hotel where I could see figures moving behind the lit windows of the reception hall. Somewhere in there, my daughter was probably crying. Somewhere in there, Alan was probably trying to explain away what had just happened. Somewhere in there, the life I'd built for the past 25 years was crumbling. I'm sure, I said. It's time everyone knew the truth about the ranch. As I drove away, I caught a glimpse of Alan in my rear-view mirror. He was standing in the hotel's entrance, frantically talking on his phone, his face white with panic. He had no idea what was coming for him, but he was about to find out. The drive back to the ranch gave me too much time to think about how we'd gotten to this point. 25 miles of dark highway stretched before me. And with each mile, the memories came flooding back. Not the good ones from Avery's childhood, but the slow, systematic destruction of our relationship that Alan had orchestrated over the past 2 years. It started small, the way these things always do. Little comments that seemed innocent enough at first. Dad seems really tired lately, doesn't he? Avery would say during our Sunday dinners. Maybe he's working too hard on the ranch. At first, I thought she was being caring. My 68-year-old body did ache more than it used to, and managing 800 acres of cattle ranch wasn't getting any easier, but then the comments became more frequent, more pointed. Alan thinks you should consider hiring more help, she mentioned one evening as we sat on the porch watching the sunset. He's worried about you handling everything alone. Alan, who had never set foot on a working ranch before meeting my daughter Alan, who wore designer suits to family barbecues and complained about the dust. Alan was worried about me. The real manipulation started about 18 months ago, right after Alan proposed. Suddenly, every conversation with Avery included his opinions, his concerns, his suggestions. He was always the reasonable one, the practical one, the one looking out for everyone's best interests. Alan says it's not fair that I don't have any legal claim to the ranch. Avery told me one day, her voice carefully neutral. He says most fathers would have already started the transfer process. I remember the way my coffee tasted bitter that morning, the way my chest tightened with something I couldn't name yet. Transfer process? You know, putting the property in my name for tax purposes. Alan's looked into it. He says we could save thousands in estate taxes if we plan ahead. Alan again. Always Alan with his research, his plans, his convenient solutions to problems I didn't know I had. The worst part was watching my daughter change. Avery had always been independent, strong-willed like her mother. She'd worked summers on the ranch, knew every fence line and water tank. But gradually Alan's voice started coming out of her mouth. Dad, you're being stubborn about this ranch thing, she said during one particularly tense dinner. Alan just wants to help. He has experience with property management. Property management? As if the Double C Ranch was just another real estate investment. As if the land my grandfather homesteaded in 1923 was just a business asset to be optimized. What kind of experience? I asked, though I already knew the answer would disappoint me. He manages several commercial properties in Houston. He knows about land values, market trends, that sort of thing. That sort of thing. Not the kind that involved getting up at 4:30 every morning to check on pregnant cows. Not the kind that meant repairing fence in 100 degrees heat or losing sleep during drought years, praying the wells wouldn't run dry. The pressure intensified after they got engaged. Alan started showing up uninvited, usually when Avery wasn't around. He'd walk around the property with his phone out taking pictures, asking questions about acreage and mineral rights. Just curious, he'd say with that practiced smile, trying to understand Avery's heritage, but heritage wasn't what he was calculating. I caught him on the phone one afternoon standing by the barn and talking to someone about land comps and development potential. When he saw me approaching, he ended the call quickly. "Business call," he explained. "You know how it is." I didn't know how it was. I'd never made a business call standing in someone else's barn without permission. The lies started small, too. Alan would tell Avery that I'd agreed to things I'd never agreed to, that I'd said things I'd never said. Dad told Alan he's ready to slow down. Avery informed me one Sunday. "He's excited about having you take over more of the operations." I stared at my daughter across the dinner table, searching her face for any sign that she knew this wasn't true. But she believed him. She wanted to believe him. "When did I say that?" I asked carefully. "Last week when you two talked by the south pasture," Alan said. "You seemed relieved to have someone to share the burden with." I remembered that conversation. Alan had cornered me while I was checking the fence line, asking pointed questions about profit margins and operating costs. I'd given him short answers and walked away as soon as I could. Somehow, he'd interpreted my politeness as enthusiasm for his involvement. The gaslighting escalated from there. According to Alan, I was always saying things I didn't remember saying, agreeing to things I'd never agreed to. Avery started looking at me with concern, as if I was becoming forgetful, unreliable. "Are you feeling okay, Dad?" she asked one evening after Alan had claimed I'd promised to show him the property survey maps. "You seem a little confused lately." Confused? That's what Alan wanted her to think, that her old father was losing his grip, becoming a burden, maybe even becoming dangerous to himself and others. The truth was, I was more alert than I'd been in years. I started paying attention to every word Alan said, every claim he made, every story he told. I started taking notes, keeping track of his lies, and I started making phone calls. The first call was to my lawyer, Jim Morrison, who'd handled my affairs for 20 years. "Has anyone contacted you about transferring the ranch property?" I asked him. "No, Clifford, should someone have?" "Alan Peterson, Avery's fiancé, he's been telling her that property transfers are common for tax purposes." There was a long pause. "Clifford, you know the situation with the ranch." "That's not exactly accurate." I knew the situation. I'd known it for 25 years. But Alan didn't know it, and neither did Avery. I'd been carrying that secret alone since Margaret died, protecting my daughter from a truth that would have complicated her life unnecessarily. "I think it's time to make some calls, Jim." "Are you sure?" "Once we start this process, I'm sure." The second call was harder. Robert Hawthorne had been my contact for 25 years, checking in quarterly, managing the financial aspects of my position. He was surprised to hear from me outside our normal schedule. "Is everything all right, Clifford?" "I think it's time to reveal the arrangement," I told him. "My daughter's getting married to someone who doesn't understand the situation. That's a big decision." "Are you certain?" I thought about Alan's hands on my daughter, his voice in her ear, his plans for property that wasn't mine to give. "I'm certain." The third call was the most difficult. Dr. Patricia Santos had been our family physician for 15 years. She delivered Avery, held Margaret's hand during the cancer treatments, and helped me through the darkest period of my life. "Patricia, I need you to do something for me. I need a complete physical and cognitive evaluation." "Clifford, you just had your annual physical 3 months ago. Everything was fine." "I know, but I need documentation. Official documentation that I'm mentally competent and physically capable." There was a pause. "Is someone suggesting otherwise?" I explained the situation as carefully as I could. How Alan was painting me as confused, forgetful, unable to manage my responsibilities. How Avery was starting to believe it. "That son of a bitch," Patricia said, her professional demeanor slipping. "Excuse my language, but that's emotional abuse, textbook manipulation. Can you help me? I'll do you one better. I'll run every test in the book. Blood work, cognitive assessment, physical capability evaluation. When I'm done, you'll have documentation that you're sharper than most 40-year-olds. The results came back exactly as Patricia predicted. Perfect blood pressure, excellent cognitive function, physical capabilities well above average for my age group. I kept the medical reports in my safe along with the other documents that would soon become very important. But I made one mistake during those months of preparation. I underestimated how far Alan would go to get what he wanted. I thought he'd keep pushing gradually, wearing me down with patience and persistence. I thought he'd continue the psychological campaign, slowly convincing Avery that her father was becoming unreliable. I never imagined he'd try to humiliate me publicly at his own wedding. I never thought he'd be desperate enough to demand the ranch keys in front of 200 witnesses, and I certainly never expected him to hit me. That slap changed everything. It moved up my timeline by months, forced my hand in a way I hadn't planned. But maybe that was for the best. Maybe it was time for Alan to learn that some secrets are worth keeping, and some lies have consequences he could never imagine. As I pulled into the ranch driveway, I could see my phone lighting up with missed calls. Avery, probably maybe Alan, definitely people who'd witnessed what happened at the reception and wanted to know what came next. But there was only one call I cared about making. I dialed Robert's number again as I sat in my truck, looking out at the land I'd protected for 25 years. Robert, it's Clifford again. How soon can you get the board members to Houston? If it's urgent, I can have them here by tomorrow morning. I touched my swollen cheek, felt the ache in my hip where I'd hit the marble floor. It's urgent. Alan Peterson just made the biggest mistake of his life. It's time he learned who really owns the Double C Ranch. The truth about the Double C Ranch began 25 years ago on the worst day of my life. Margaret had been fighting cancer for 18 months, and we'd spent our life savings on treatments that ultimately couldn't save her. I was sitting in the hospital billing office staring at invoices totaling over $300,000 when the ranch foreman found me there. "Mr. Clifford," he said, his hat in his hands, "I'm real sorry to bother you at a time like this, but we got a problem." The problem was drought. The worst in 50 years. Our cattle were dying, our wells were running dry, and we had no money left to drill new ones. The bank was already circling, talking about foreclosure. Margaret was gone. Avery was only 7 years old, and I was about to lose everything my family had built since 1923. That's when Robert Hawthorne knocked on my door. I'll never forget that evening. I was sitting on the porch watching the sun set over land that might not be mine much longer when a black sedan pulled up the drive. A man in an expensive suit got out carrying a leather briefcase and wearing the kind of confident expression that comes with serious money. "Mr. Wellington, I'm Robert Hawthorne representing the Meridian Investment Consortium. I understand you might be interested in a business arrangement." I was too exhausted to be polite. "If you're here to make a lowball offer on my ranch, you can save us both some time." "Actually," he said, settling into the porch chair beside me without invitation, "I'm here to offer you something quite different. A chance to keep your ranch and solve your financial problems permanently." He opened his briefcase and pulled out a thick contract. "Meridian specializes in agricultural preservation. We buy ranches and farms from families in crisis, then lease them back to the original owners for management. You keep your home, your livelihood, your legacy. We handle the finances." I was skeptical. "What's the catch?" "No catch. You become our ranch manager. We pay you a generous salary, cover all operating expenses, and handle improvements and expansions. From the outside, nothing changes. You're still Clifford Wellington running the Wellington Ranch. But legally, the property belongs to Meridian. For how long? Indefinitely. As long as you want the arrangement to continue. When you're ready to retire, we'll work out a transition plan. If you want to buy the property back someday, we'll negotiate fair terms based on current market value." I stared at the contract, my mind racing. "Why would you do this? What do you get out of it?" Robert smiled. "Meridian isn't just any investment group, Mr. Wellington. We represent some very wealthy individuals who believe in preserving American agricultural heritage. They don't need immediate returns. They're playing a longer game." "Who are these people?" "That's confidential. But I can tell you they're patriots who understand that family ranches like yours are the backbone of this country. They'd rather see them preserved and properly managed than broken up and sold to developers." The offer was too good to be true. Salary of $60,000 a year, plus full benefits, all ranch expenses covered, complete autonomy in day-to-day operations, and most importantly, Avery would inherit my position when I was gone, along with the option to eventually buy back the land. I need time to think, of course, but Mr. Wellington, the bank is planning to start foreclosure proceedings next week. This offer expires in 48 hours. I signed the contract that night. What choice did I have? I was drowning, and Meridian threw me a lifeline. The next morning, trucks arrived with drilling equipment. Within a week, we had 3 new wells producing clean water. Within a month, the cattle were healthy again. Within 6 months, the ranch was more profitable than it had ever been under my ownership. For 25 years, the arrangement worked perfectly. Meridian sent quarterly checks, covered all major expenses, and never interfered with my decisions. Robert visited 4 times a year, always friendly and supportive. I was the ranch manager, but to everyone else, I was still the owner. Even Avery believed the ranch belonged to me. I planned to tell her the truth when she turned 21, but she was in college then, focused on her studies and her social life. When she graduated, she moved to Houston for her career. The ranch wasn't part of her immediate future, so I kept postponing the conversation. Then Alan came along and everything changed. The first time he visited the ranch, he walked around like he was conducting an appraisal. He asked pointed questions about acreage, mineral rights, and land values. He wanted to see property records, tax assessments, and profit statements. Just trying to understand Avery's inheritance, he He explained when I caught him photographing the barns and equipment. But his questions were too specific, too calculated. He wasn't just curious about Avery's future. He was planning something. I called Robert that week. We might have a problem. What kind of problem? Avery's boyfriend is asking a lot of questions about the property. He's pushing for information I can't give him without revealing the arrangement. How serious is the relationship? Serious enough that he's talking about marriage. There was a long pause. Clifford, you know the terms of the contract. If anyone outside the family discovers the true ownership structure, Meridian has the right to terminate the arrangement immediately. I knew I'd read that clause dozens of times over the years. It was Meridian's protection against publicity or legal complications. If word got out that wealthy investors were secretly buying family ranches, it could create political problems they wanted to avoid. What are my options? Tell your daughter the truth. If she's planning to marry this man, she needs to know what she's really inheriting. But every time I tried to tell Avery, Alan was there, steering the conversation in different directions, asking his own questions, making his own assumptions. He assumed the ranch was valuable property that would someday belong to Avery. He assumed I was a wealthy landowner who could afford to be generous with wedding gifts and financial support. He had no idea that I was essentially a well-paid employee managing someone else's investment. The pressure intensified after they got engaged. Alan started making comments about improvements he wanted to make, changes he envisioned for the property. He talked about subdividing pastures, developing recreational facilities, maybe even selling off parcels for residential development. This place has incredible potential, he told me one afternoon standing on the hilltop overlooking the main house. With the right marketing, we could turn this into a destination ranch, wedding venue, corporate retreats, that sort of thing. My blood ran cold. The Meridian contract specifically prohibited any commercial development without board approval. Alan was planning to turn a working cattle ranch into a tourist attraction. That's not really my vision for the place, I told him carefully. Well, it won't be your decision much longer, will it? He smiled, but there was steel in his voice. Once Avery and I are married, we'll be the ones making those choices. That's when I realized Alan wasn't just planning to inherit the ranch. He was planning to take it over while I was still alive. He was maneuvering to push me aside, convince Avery that I was too old and stubborn to manage the property effectively. I started documenting everything, every conversation, every demand, every lie he told Avery about what I'd supposedly agreed to. I also started preparing for the inevitable confrontation. The medical evaluation was just the beginning. I also had my lawyer prepare a complete dossier on Alan Peterson, his credit history, his business dealings, his previous relationships. What we found wasn't pretty. Alan had a pattern of targeting women with assets. His first marriage had ended when his wife discovered he'd been secretly borrowing against her inherited property. His business partnerships consistently failed, leaving his partners holding the debt while Alan moved on to new opportunities. But the most damaging information came from his current employer. Alan was facing an internal investigation for questionable expense reports and unauthorized use of company resources. He was likely to be fired within the next 6 months. He was desperate, and desperate men do dangerous things. I should have told Avery everything before the wedding. I should have sat her down and explained the whole situation from the Meridian contract to Alan's financial problems. But I kept hoping she'd see through his manipulation on her own. I kept believing that my smart, independent daughter would recognize what was happening. Instead, Alan escalated to public humiliation and physical violence. He forced my hand in the worst possible way in front of the worst possible audience. Now sitting in my truck in the ranch driveway, I knew there was no going back. Tomorrow morning, Robert would arrive with the Meridian board members. Alan would learn that he just assaulted the manager of a ranch owned by some very powerful people. People who didn't appreciate threats to their investments or attacks on their employees. My phone rang, interrupting my thoughts. Alan's name flashed on the screen. I let it go to voicemail, then listened to his message. Clifford, look, I know things got out of hand tonight. I was stressed, maybe had too much champagne, but we're family now, and family works things out. Call me back. We need to talk about moving forward. Moving forward. As if slapping me in front of 200 witnesses was just a minor bump in our relationship. As if tomorrow would bring business as usual. Alan had no idea what was coming for him. But in about 12 hours, he was going to get an education in the difference between seeming to own something and actually owning it. And more importantly, he was going to learn that some people have friends in very high places. I was up before dawn as usual. But this morning felt different. Every sound seemed amplified, the coffee maker gurgling, my boots on the hardwood floor, the distant lowing of cattle in the east pasture. Today was the day Alan Peterson would learn that some secrets have consequences. Robert called at 6:15. We're about an hour out from the ranch. The board members flew in from Dallas, Denver, and Phoenix. They're not happy about being pulled away from their schedules, but when I explained the situation, they agreed this needed immediate attention. How much should I tell them about Alan? Everything. They'll want to understand exactly what kind of threat we're dealing with. I spent the next hour preparing. I pulled out all my documentation. The medical reports proving my competency, the legal assessment of Alan's character and financial situation, the recordings I'd made of our conversations over the past year, everything that would paint a complete picture of what had been happening. At 7:30, 3 black SUVs pulled up the ranch road, kicking up dust in the morning sun. I watched from the kitchen window as 6 people got out, all wearing business attire that looked out of place against the backdrop of cattle pasture and mesquite trees. Robert led the group, looking exactly the same as he had 25 years ago. Beside him walked a woman in her 60s with silver hair and the bearing of someone accustomed to being the smartest person in the room. The others were men in their 50s and 60s, all carrying themselves with the quiet confidence that comes from real power. "Clifford," Robert said as they approached the porch. "I'd like you to meet the Meridian Board. Margaret Caldwell, Chairwoman. James Morrison, Chief Financial Officer. David Chen, Legal Counsel, Thomas Wright, Operations Director, and Patricia Vasquez, Risk Management." I shook hands with each of them, noting their firm grips and direct eye contact. These weren't people who wasted time on pleasantries. "Mr. Wellington," Margaret Caldwell said, her voice crisp and professional. "Robert has briefed us on the situation. We understand you've been threatened and physically assaulted by someone attempting to gain control of this property." "That's correct. And this person believes you own the ranch outright." "He does. So does my daughter. I've maintained the fiction for 25 years as required by the contract." David Chen opened a briefcase and pulled out a tablet. "We've been doing our own research on Alan Peterson since Robert called yesterday. What we found is disturbing." He turned the tablet toward me, showing a detailed financial profile. "Mr. Peterson is heavily in debt. Credit cards, personal loans, and what appears to be gambling obligations to some unsavory individuals. He owes approximately $150,000 to various creditors." Margaret Caldwell picked up the thread. "More concerning is his employment situation. Our contacts at his firm confirm he's under investigation for embezzlement. He's been using company credit cards for personal expenses and billing clients for work that was never performed. They're planning to fire him next week." Patricia Vasquez added. "He likely knows it's coming, which explains his desperation to secure assets through marriage." I felt a sick twist in my stomach. "Does Avery know any of this?" "We doubt it. Thomas Wright said Peterson has been very careful to present a successful facade, expensive car, upscale apartment, designer clothes, all purchased on credit he can't afford to repay." James Morrison consulted his own tablet. "The psychological profile is textbook predatory behavior. He targets women with assets, uses manipulation and emotional abuse to gain control, then systematically strips away their resources. His first wife lost her family's jewelry business to his debts," David Chen continued. "His second serious relationship ended when the woman discovered he'd forged her signature on loan documents using her house as collateral. The picture was becoming clearer and uglier by the minute. Alan wasn't just an opportunist. He was a practiced con artist who'd found the perfect mark in my trusting daughter." "What's our legal position if he continues to pursue claims on the property?" I asked. David Chen smiled coldly. "Non-existent. He has no standing whatsoever. The property belongs to Meridian, operated under a management contract with you. Even if he were legitimately married to your daughter, even if you wanted to transfer your management rights to them, he would need approval from this board, which he'll never get," Margaret Caldwell said firmly. "More importantly," Patricia Vasquez added, "his assault on you last night was witnessed by over 200 people. We have statements from 6 witnesses who've already contacted our legal team. Mr. Peterson committed felony assault against a Meridian employee in the course of his duties." I blinked. "Felony assault? Assault against a person over 65 is automatically elevated to a felony in Texas," David Chen explained. "And since you were acting as our representative, it's also assault against a corporate officer. Mr. Peterson is looking at serious prison time." My phone rang, interrupting the conversation. Alan's name flashed on the screen. Margaret Caldwell gestured for me to answer it while David Chen activated a recording app on his tablet. "Alan Clifford, thank God. Look, I've been thinking about last night, and I realize I owe you a huge apology. I was way out of line. The stress of the wedding, the champagne, you know how it is." "Do I? Come on, don't be like that. We're family now. Family forgives and moves on. I'm thinking we should meet this morning, work out the details of the property transfer, get this ranch situation settled so there's no more confusion." I looked at Margaret Caldwell, who nodded for me to continue. "Property transfer? Don't play dumb, Clifford. You know what I'm talking about. Avery deserves her inheritance, and frankly, after last night, I think it's clear you're not competent to manage the ranch anymore. The way you reacted to a simple business discussion, losing your temper like that, the audacity was breathtaking. He was actually trying to rewrite history, making it sound like I was the one who'd become violent. Alan, are you seriously trying to claim that I hit you? I'm trying to be diplomatic about it. Look, we all saw what happened. You got agitated. You took a swing at me. You lost your balance and fell. It was embarrassing for everyone, especially Avery. Patricia Vasquez was furiously taking notes while David Chen made sure the recording was capturing everything clearly. So, you want me to transfer the ranch to you and Avery? It's the right thing to do, Clifford. And honestly, it's what Avery wants. She's been telling me for months how worried she is about you living alone out there, trying to manage everything by yourself. She'll feel so much better knowing the property is in responsible hands. Responsible hands, meaning yours, meaning ours. Look, I know you don't like me much, but I'm not going anywhere. Avery and I are married now. I'm going to be part of this family for the rest of your life. We can do this the easy way or we can do it the hard way. There it was. The threat delivered with that smooth confidence that had fooled my daughter for 2 years. What's the hard way, Alan? The hard way is lawyers and doctors and competency hearings. The hard way is Avery having to make some very difficult decisions about her father's mental state. The hard way is public embarrassment for everyone involved. Margaret Caldwell's expression had turned to ice. She gestured for me to keep him talking. And if I just sign over the ranch, all of that goes away. All of that goes away. We have a nice family dinner we put last night behind us and we start fresh. I'm even willing to let you stay on as a sort of consultant. You could keep living in the house, help with day-to-day operations. Think of it as a comfortable retirement. The patronizing tone was unbearable. He was offering to let me stay in my own home as his employee, managing property he thought he was stealing from me. I need to think about it. Don't think too long, Clifford. I've got lawyers on speed dial and Avery's getting more worried about you by the hour. She spent the whole night crying, asking if her father's losing his mind. He hung up before I could respond. I set the phone down and looked at the faces around me. 5 of the most powerful people I'd ever met and they all looked furious. Textbook elder abuse. Patricia Vasquez said, isolation, gaslighting, financial exploitation, and threats of institutionalization, it's all there. The recording is more than enough for criminal charges. David Chen added, extortion, attempted fraud, and conspiracy to commit elder abuse. Margaret Caldwell stood up. Mr. Wellington, I want you to call Mr. Peterson back. Tell him you've decided to agree to his demands, but you need to meet in person to sign the papers. Tell him to come to the ranch this afternoon. You want him to come here? Oh, yes. We have some things to discuss with Mr. Peterson. It's time he learned exactly who he's been threatening. Thomas Wright checked his watch. I'll call our security team. They can be here in 2 hours. Security team? Robert smiled grimly. Meridian protects its investments, Clifford. And more importantly, we protect our people. Mr. Peterson assaulted one of our employees and attempted to defraud one of our properties. That requires a response. I thought about Avery, probably sitting in some hotel room right now, confused and heartbroken, believing that her father had somehow caused the disaster at her wedding. I thought about all the lies Alan had told her, all the ways he'd twisted her love for me into doubt and worry. What about my daughter? She doesn't know any of this. She will, Margaret Caldwell said firmly. After we're finished with Mr. Peterson, we'll sit down with your daughter and explain everything. The truth about the ranch, the truth about her husband, and the truth about what he's been doing to both of you. My phone buzzed with a text message from Alan. Noon at the ranch. Bring the deed and any other paperwork. Time to make this official. I showed the message to Margaret Caldwell. She smiled, but there was no warmth in it. Perfect. Mr. Peterson wants to make things official. We'll be happy to accommodate him. Alan arrived at the ranch 15 minutes early, driving his leased BMW like he owned the place. I watched from the kitchen window as he parked near the front porch, adjusting his tie and checking his reflection in the side mirror. He had no idea that 6 of the most powerful people in Texas were watching him from the barn where they'd positioned themselves with a clear view of the house. The Meridian security team had arrived an hour earlier. 3 former federal agents who now handled sensitive situations for the consortium. They were stationed around the property, invisible but ready. Margaret Caldwell had been very clear about their instructions. Observe, record, and intervene only if Alan became violent. Remember, she'd told me before taking her position in the barn, let him talk. Let him make his demands. Give him enough rope to hang himself legally. I opened the front door before Alan could knock. He strode in with that familiar swagger, carrying a leather briefcase and wearing an expression of barely contained triumph. Clifford, he said, not bothering to shake hands. I'm glad you came to your senses. This is really the best thing for everyone. Is it? Absolutely. Avery's relieved that we're finally going to resolve this situation. She was so worried about you after last night. He set his briefcase on the dining table and opened it. I've brought all the necessary paperwork. Transfer of deed, Power of attorney documents, everything we need to make this official. I stared at the papers he was spreading across my grandmother's dining table. Legal documents he'd obviously prepared in advance, probably weeks ago. This wasn't a spur-off moment decision prompted by stress and champagne. This was a carefully planned operation. You've been preparing for this for a while. Alan looked up, startled by the observation. For a moment, his mask slipped and I saw calculation in his eyes. Then he forced a smile. Well, I am a businessman, Clifford. I believe in being prepared. After Avery and I got engaged, I started thinking about family assets, estate planning, that sort of thing. Just being responsible. Responsible. I sat down across from him, noting the small recording device David Chen had given me, hidden in my shirt pocket. Tell me about responsibility, Alan. Tell me about your responsibilities to your employer. His hand froze over the documents. What? Your job, Alan? The one you're about to lose for embezzlement. The color drained from his face. I don't know what you're talking about. Sure you do. Company credit cards used for personal expenses. Billing clients for work you never performed. Your bosses are planning to fire you next week. They're probably filing criminal charges, too. Alan's eyes darted toward the windows as if he was suddenly aware that we might not be alone. Who told you that? Does it matter? What matters is that Avery doesn't know, does she? She doesn't know about the gambling debts either, or the credit card bills, or the fact that you owe some very dangerous people a lot of money. He stood up abruptly, his chair scraping against the hardwood floor. You've been investigating me. I've been protecting my daughter. The same daughter you've been systematically manipulating for 2 years. Manipulating? His voice rose with genuine outrage. I love Avery. Everything I've done has been for her, for our future together. Everything you've done has been for yourself. You saw a lonely woman with a rich father, and you saw an opportunity. Alan's composure cracked completely. Rich father, you think you're rich. This place is mortgaged to the hilt, Clifford. I've seen the financial records. You're barely breaking even on this cattle operation. The only real asset you have is the land itself. There it was. The admission that he'd been researching my finances, planning to liquidate everything I'd worked for. I kept my voice steady. So, you want the land? I want security for my wife. Avery deserves better than worrying about whether her aging father can keep this place running. He leaned forward, his tone becoming patronizing again. Look, I know you're proud. I know this ranch means a lot to you, but be realistic. You're 68 years old. You have no help, and this operation is barely profitable. Sell to a developer, invest the money properly, and everyone wins. Everyone wins. You get financial security for your retirement. Avery gets her inheritance while she's young enough to enjoy it. And I get to take care of both of you the way family should. The way family should. Coming from a man who just admitted he wanted to sell my grandfather's ranch to developers. What kind of developer are you thinking about? Alan's eyes lit up with excitement. He pulled out his phone and started swiping through photos. I've already had some preliminary conversations. There's a group out of Dallas that specializes in luxury residential communities. They're very interested in this location. He turned the phone toward me, showing architectural renderings of a gated community called Ranch View Estates. 200 houses, a golf course, and a shopping center, all built on what used to be the Double Ranch. They're offering $4.8 million for the full 800 acres, Alan continued. Can you imagine, Clifford? $4.8 million. You'd never have to worry about money again. I studied the renderings, feeling sick. You've already negotiated a price. Preliminary discussions only. I told them I needed to talk to the family first, but yes, they're very motivated. They want to break ground next spring, and you get a commission on this sale. Alan hesitated just a moment too long. Well, there would be a finder fee, standard in these kinds of transactions. How much? 2%, $200,000. He said it quickly, as if the amount didn't matter. But that's not why I'm doing this, Clifford. This is about family. $200,000, more than enough to pay off his gambling debts and credit cards, with plenty left over for a fresh start somewhere else. Probably without Avery once he'd served his purpose. What does Avery think about turning her childhood home into a subdivision? Avery wants what's best for you. She trusts me to handle the business side of things. Because you've convinced her that I'm incompetent. Alan's mask slipped again, revealing a flash of irritation. Because you are acting incompetent. This ranch is a losing proposition and you're too stubborn to admit it. How long do you think you can keep this up? Another 5 years? 10? What happens when you have a heart attack out here alone? What happens when you fall off a horse and break your hip? He was working himself into righteous anger now, believing his own justifications. Avery will inherit this place anyway when you die. All I'm doing is making sure she gets something valuable instead of a pile of dead and broken down buildings. Very thoughtful of you. It is thoughtful and it's realistic, But you can't see past your own pride to do what's right for your daughter. That's when I heard the sound of car doors slamming outside. Alan heard it too and moved to the window. "Who's that?" he asked, his voice suddenly tense. I joined him at the window. Margaret Caldwell was walking toward the house, flanked by David Chen and Thomas Wright. Behind them came Robert and the other board members. All 6 of them wore expressions that could have frozen water. "Those are the people who actually own this ranch," I said quietly. Alan spun around to face me. "What are you talking about?" "I'm talking about the fact that I don't own the Double C Ranch, Alan. I never have. I'm the manager. I work for these people." The briefcase slipped from Alan's hands, spilling legal documents across the floor. "That's impossible. 25 years ago, I was facing bankruptcy. These people bought the ranch and hired me to manage it. Everything you've seen, everything you've planned, everything you've threatened me for, none of it belongs to me." Alan's face went through a series of expressions. Confusion, disbelief, and finally understanding. "You're lying." "I wish I were, but those people walking up to my door. They represent a consortium worth about $2 billion. They own ranches, farms, and agricultural properties across 6 states, and you just spent the last year trying to defraud them." The knock on the door came exactly on cue. I opened it to find Margaret Caldwell and her team waiting on the porch. "Mr. Wellington," she said formally, "thank you for calling us. I believe you have someone here who wants to discuss property transactions." Alan was backing toward the far wall, his eyes wide with panic. "This is a setup." "No, Alan," I said sadly. "This is reality, something you've been avoiding for a very long time." Margaret Caldwell stepped into the room, her presence immediately dominating the space. "Mr. Peterson, I presume?" "I'm Margaret Caldwell, chairwoman of the Meridian Investment Consortium. I understand you've been making inquiries about our property." "Your property?" "The Double Ranch? 800 acres of prime Texas cattle land purchased by Meridian in 1998. Mr. Wellington here is our ranch manager and an excellent one." David Chen opened his own briefcase and pulled out a thick folder. "We have copies of your conversation this morning, Mr. Peterson. Extortion, attempted fraud, conspiracy to commit elder abuse. Quite an impressive list of felonies." Alan looked frantically around the room as if searching for an escape route. "You can't prove anything." Thomas Wright held up a small digital recorder. "Actually, we can. Every word recorded with Mr. Wellington's full cooperation. We also have witness statements from your wedding reception," Patricia Vasquez added, entering the room with the others. "Assault against a senior citizen in front of 200 witnesses. The district attorney is very interested in pursuing charges." Alan's legs seemed to give out. He slumped into a chair, his head in his hands. "This can't be happening." "Oh, but it is," Margaret Caldwell said coldly. "You see, Mr. Peterson. Meridian protects its investments and more importantly, we protect our people. Mr. Wellington has served us faithfully for 25 years. When someone threatens him, they threaten us. What do you want?" Alan's voice was barely a whisper. "We want you to disappear," she said simply, "permanently. From Mr. Wellington's life, from this property, and from Texas if you're smart." David Chen placed a document on the table. "This is a restraining order effective immediately. You are prohibited from contacting Mr. Wellington, his daughter, or anyone associated with this property. Violation will result in immediate arrest. You can't do this. Avery is my wife." "Actually," Patricia Vasquez said, checking her tablet, "your marriage may not be valid. Our investigation has revealed some interesting facts about your previous relationships. There's evidence suggesting you never properly divorced your first wife." Alan's face went white. "That's impossible, is it? We'll let the authorities sort that out. In the meantime, you have exactly 1 hour to collect your belongings and leave the state." Margaret Caldwell moved closer, her voice dropping to barely above a whisper. "Mr. Peterson, you are a small, pathetic man who preys on vulnerable women. You are exactly the kind of predator we've spent 25 years keeping away from properties like this one." She straightened up, her voice returning to normal volume. "You will not contact Avery. You will not attempt to claim any property or assets. You will disappear quietly or we will destroy you completely. Do I make myself clear?" Alan nodded frantically, then looked at me with something like pleading in his eyes. "Clifford, please. I made mistakes, but I really do love Avery." I met his gaze steadily. "If you loved my daughter, you never would have tried to steal her inheritance. You never would have lied to her about me. And you sure as hell never would have hit me at her wedding." The security team appeared in the doorway. 3 large men who somehow made the room feel smaller. "Time to go, Mr. Peterson," one of them said politely. Alan gathered his scattered papers with shaking hands, stuffed them back into his briefcase, and walked toward the door. At the threshold, he turned back one last time. "This isn't over," Margaret Caldwell smiled, but there was no warmth in it whatsoever. "Oh, Mr. Peterson, this is very, very over. The silence after Alan's departure was profound. I stood on my porch, watching the dust settle from his BMW as it disappeared down the ranch road, knowing I'd never see him again. The Meridian board members were gathered in my living room, quietly packing up their documents and preparing for what would be the most difficult conversation of my life. "Mr. Wellington," Margaret Caldwell said gently. "We need to discuss your daughter, Avery." Sweet, trusting Avery, who was probably sitting in some hotel room right now, wondering why her wedding had ended in disaster and why her new husband had suddenly vanished. She had no idea that her marriage was likely invalid, that Alan had been planning to steal her inheritance, or that everything she believed about her family was built on a 25-year-old lie. "She's going to hate me," I said quietly. Robert shook his head. "She's going to be hurt and confused, but she's also going to be relieved once she understands what Alan was really planning." David Chen looked up from his tablet. "We've located her. She's at the Four Seasons downtown." Our investigators spoke with the hotel staff. "She's been in her room since last night, refusing all calls except from Alan, who stopped calling about an hour ago." Patricia Vasquez added meaningfully. Margaret Caldwell made a decision. "We'll go to her together, all of us. She needs to hear the truth from you, but she also needs to understand the larger picture." An hour later, we were sitting in the hotel's private conference room. Avery arrived looking exhausted and confused, still wearing yesterday's wedding dress. Her eyes red from crying when she saw me with 6 strangers in business suits. Her confusion deepened. "Dad, what's going on? Where's Alan? He was supposed to meet me here hours ago, but he's not answering his phone." I guided her to a chair, my heart breaking at the trust still visible in her eyes. "Honey, we need to talk. There are some things you need to know." "Is this about last night? About what happened at the reception?" She looked around the room nervously. "Dad, I know Alan shouldn't have. I know he lost his temper, but you were being so difficult about the ranch and he's been under a lot of pressure." "Avery." My voice was firmer than I intended. "Alan hit me. He assaulted me in front of 200 people because I wouldn't give him something that was never mine to give. Never yours to give." "Dad, what are you talking about?" Margaret Caldwell leaned forward. "Miss Peterson Wellington." Avery corrected automatically. I kept my name. "Miss Wellington, I'm Margaret Caldwell. I represent the Meridian Investment Consortium. We own the Double Ranch." The words hung in the air like a physical presence. Avery blinked several times as if she hadn't heard correctly. "You own? But that's impossible. The ranch has been in our family for generations." "It was in your family," Robert explained gently. "Until 25 years ago when your father was facing bankruptcy after your mother's medical bills. Meridian purchased the property and hired your father as ranch manager." I watched my daughter's face as the implications hit her. "Ranch manager? I'm an employee, honey. A well-paid, well-treated employee, but an employee nonetheless. I've never owned the land. I never had the right to transfer it to you or anyone else." Avery's breathing became shallow. But you always talked about it being my inheritance. You always said the ranch would be mine someday. And it could be." Margaret Caldwell said. "Meridian has always been willing to sell the property back to the Wellington family if and when they were in a position to purchase it." "How much would that cost?" David Chen consulted his tablet. "Current market value is approximately $4.2 million. The number hit Avery like a physical blow. She slumped back in her chair, staring at nothing. $4.2 million, Alan said. Alan thought he was marrying into wealth. Thomas Wright said bluntly. "He spent 2 years planning to steal what he believed was your inheritance." Patricia Vasquez opened her briefcase and pulled out a thick folder. "Ms. Wellington, we need you to understand exactly who you married. Alan Peterson is a con artist with a pattern of targeting women with assets." For the next 30 minutes, they laid out everything. Alan's debts, his employment problems, his history of financial fraud. They showed her the recordings of his phone calls, the evidence of his manipulation, the proof that he'd been planning to sell the ranch to developers. But the worst revelation came last. "There's also evidence suggesting that your marriage may not be legally valid," David Chen said carefully. "Alan appears to have never properly divorced his first wife." Avery made a sound like a wounded animal. "He's married to someone else." "Was married. The first wife has been missing for 3 years. There's an ongoing investigation." My daughter doubled over as if she'd been punched in the stomach. I reached for her, but she pulled away. "Don't," she whispered. "Just don't." We sat in silence for several minutes. I could hear traffic outside, the distant sound of the city continuing its daily business while my daughter's world fell apart in a hotel conference room. Finally, she looked up at me with eyes full of pain. "Did you know about Alan? I mean, did you know what he was doing?" I suspected. I'd tried to investigate, but I couldn't prove anything until recently. "Why didn't you tell me?" It was the question I'd been dreading. "Because I hoped you'd see through him on your own. Because I didn't want to be the father who destroyed his daughter's happiness based on suspicions. And because you were afraid I wouldn't believe you, she said quietly. I nodded. He was very good at making me look like the problem, making you doubt my judgment, my competency. Avery was quiet for a long time, processing everything she'd learned. When she finally spoke, her voice was steady but distant. I need time. I need to think about all of this. Margaret Caldwell stood up. Of course. Take all the time you need. Mr. Wellington's position at the ranch is secure for as long as he wants it, and if you ever decide you want to discuss purchasing the property, we're always willing to negotiate with the Wellington family. After they left, Avery and I sat alone in the conference room. The silence stretched between us, filled with 25 years of secrets and 2 years of manipulation. I feel so stupid, she finally said. You're not stupid. You're trusting. There's a difference, is there? I let a stranger convince me that my own father was losing his mind. I believed Alan when he said you were becoming forgetful, unstable. I actually started researching nursing homes. Dad, I was planning to have you declared incompetent. The confession hit me harder than Alan's slap had. Honey, no. Let me finish. I let him poison my relationship with you. I let him make me doubt everything I knew about the man who raised me, who worked himself to the bone to give me a good life after Mom died. Tears were streaming down her face now. And for what? For a man who saw me as nothing but a path to money he could steal. I reached for her hand, and this time she didn't pull away. Alan was a professional. He knew exactly how to manipulate both of us. But I should have known better. I should have trusted you. We sat holding hands while she cried. Both of us grieving for different things. She was mourning the loss of her marriage, her trust, her sense of judgment. I was mourning the relationship we'd lost to Alan's lies, and the innocence she'd never get back. 3 months later, Avery moved back to the ranch. Not permanently, but for an extended stay while she sorted out the legal mess of her invalid marriage and rebuilt her life. The annulment was surprisingly simple once Alan's bigamy was confirmed. He never contested anything, probably because he was too busy staying ahead of both creditors and law enforcement. We never heard from him again. The last report from Meridian's investigators placed him in Mexico, apparently trying to start fresh with a new identity. I hoped he'd learned something from his experience, but I doubted it. Men like Alan Peterson rarely change. The ranch felt different with Avery there. She threw herself into the work with the intensity of someone trying to outrun her thoughts. She learned to mend fences, helped with cattle vaccinations, and took over the bookkeeping with an efficiency that impressed even Margaret Caldwell during her quarterly visits. Your daughter has excellent business instincts, Margaret told me one afternoon as we watched Avery negotiate with a cattle buyer. If she ever wants to make an offer on the property, I think the board would be very receptive. But money wasn't the issue anymore. Avery's trust fund from her mother's life insurance combined with her own savings and earning potential would be enough for a down payment. The real question was whether she wanted to tie herself to this place, to this life after everything that had happened. The answer came on a quiet Sunday evening in December. We were sitting on the porch watching the sunset paint the sky in shades of orange and pink when she finally brought it up. I want to buy the ranch, she said simply. Are you sure? You don't have to feel obligated. I'm not doing it out of obligation. I'm doing it because this is home. Because this is where Mom and I picked wildflowers every spring. Because this is where you taught me to ride. Because this is where I learned what real love looks like. She paused, then continued more quietly. Alan made me forget who I was, where I came from. He made me ashamed of this place, embarrassed by our simple life. But there's nothing simple about what you've built here, Dad. There's nothing embarrassing about honest work and taking care of the land. 6 months later, the transfer was complete. Avery Wellington became the official owner of the Double C Ranch with a mortgage she could comfortably afford and a father who stayed on as ranch manager, though now he answered to her instead of Meridian. Margaret Caldwell attended the closing ceremony, bringing champagne and an unexpected gift. 25 years ago, Meridian bought this ranch to preserve it, she said, raising her glass. Today, we're selling it back to the family that loves it most. It's exactly the outcome we hoped for when we first met your father. As I watched Avery sign the papers that made her a landowner, I felt a peace I hadn't experienced since Margaret died. My daughter was home. She was safe and she was in control of her own destiny. Alan Peterson was a bad memory that was fading more each day. That evening, as we walked the fence line together, checking for damage from the recent storms, Avery asked the question I'd been expecting. Do you ever regret it? Keeping the truth about Meridian from me for so long. I considered the question carefully. I regret that it made you vulnerable to Alan's manipulation. I regret that it complicated your relationship with the ranch, but I don't regret protecting you from financial worries when you were young. And I don't regret working with people who cared more about preserving this land than making a quick profit. She nodded, then surprised me with her next comment. I've been thinking about Mom lately about what she would say about all this. What do you think she'd say? Avery smiled, The first genuinely happy expression I'd seen from her in months. I think she'd say that families protect each other no matter what. And that home isn't about who owns the deed. It's about who belongs here. As we walked back toward the house, I realized that Alan Peterson had given us an unexpected gift. By trying to destroy our family, he'd forced us to rebuild it on a foundation of truth instead of secrets. We were stronger now, more honest with each other, more appreciative of what we had. The ranch lights were warm and welcoming as we approached the house. Somewhere in the distance, cattle were settling in for the night. The land stretched out around us, familiar and comforting, ours again in the way that mattered most. I was finally free from the weight of secrets, and my daughter was finally free from the influence of a man who'd never deserved her trust. It wasn't the ending either of us had planned, but it was the ending we needed. Sometimes the best revenge is simply outlasting those who try to destroy you. Sometimes the greatest victory is finding peace with the truth, no matter how complicated the truth might be.